Welcome to our 4 Steps to ITAM Risk Remediation with ABB and Anglepoint. We're so happy to have you all joining with us today. As we're getting started, we'd love to hear where you're tuning in from, so you can go ahead and drop that in the chat. As we begin, a few housekeeping items to go over. Again, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out the link to everyone about a week later from today. As we're listening to our presenters today, we ask that you use the Q&A feature to ask any questions that you may have. We hope that this webinar answers many of your questions, but as you have questions that come up, feel free to use that Q&A button. And the last thing we want to call out as we're getting started today is that we want to remind you all that the MQ, the Magic Quadrant report from Gartner, is out, and you can go ahead and download the report at anglepoint.com/MQ. And we'd just like to welcome you all out again. To get things started, I'd like to introduce Sarah Marriott, who is a director here at Anglepoint, who will be helping out with this webinar today. Sarah, thank you for joining. And one special shout out to her is that she is well acclaimed. She recently won the ITAM Reviews Consultant of the Year award. So I'd like to welcome her out and go ahead and pass it on to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. I appreciate the shout out, and thanks so much for joining everyone, and welcome to our very special webinar for today, the 4 steps to ITAM risk remediation. And I'm particularly excited about this webinar because it hits at the crux of everything that we do at ITAM. How do we make sure that our recommendations remediating risk and realizing those cost savings and avoidance and whatever they happen to be, how do we make sure that someone actually does something about it and the recommendation is actioned? I'm sure we've all experienced frustrations at different times where risks are raised and nothing happens, or even worse, perhaps reports happen for the sake of reports and no one's read it, let alone done anything about it. But today I will be talking to 2 wonderful people from ABB, Harry and Andre, about how we have partnered to overcome some of these challenges and enacted real change at ABB. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Marriott. I'm a director and have worked across the world in many different roles. I have bought and sold software, looked after technology procurement, and even wrote some code at a cloud company. And since joining Anglepoint almost 5 years ago now, I have worked across a few different roles, starting as the global practice leader for specialty licensing, responsible for service delivery of hundreds of non-top tier publishers like VMware and Micro Focus, Dassault, Autodesk, and many others. I then moved into client success, looking after our largest managed service clients across all of their work streams to help improve their ITAM maturity. And now I'm in account management, looking after the strategic direction of clients across EMEA and APAC. Today, as I mentioned, I'm thrilled to be joined by 2 people that I've worked very closely with over the last few years. Harry, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Eric Rasson, Senior Item Manager or IT Asset Management Global Lead at ABB. I've been with the company for about 8-9 years, but I've been in the item space for over 15 years. And with us today is Andre. I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Andre. I'm from Krakow, Poland, with ABB for almost 2 years. With Asset for almost 5 years. Started also the journey somewhere else in service desk, but then I moved to Asset. So yeah, I'm the process manager for risk remediation process at ABB right now. That's one of my roles, and many others, of course. But this is the main role, and it's what we'll be talking about today.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for coming along and sharing your insights with our audience today. So for today's agenda, we're going to first talk a little bit about the context and the ABB and Anglepoint partnership. We will then do a deep dive into the process itself and then talk about the impact and some of the results since implementing that risk remediation process. And then we'll have the Q&A. But as Kirsten mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions that come up at any time throughout the session, please just type them into the Q&A box, and so then we can answer them at the end. We also have a few poll questions, so please be on the lookout for those. And we will start with this one here. What area of ITAM is the highest priority for you right now? We have quite a few options here. So many risks and probably some more we don't even know about yet. I'm sure we have some unrealized savings. Perhaps it's limited visibility about cloud spend, no one trusting the data and having data integrity concerns, manual, or perhaps it's more people-based, struggling to recruit and retain experienced people. So I'll just give you a minute. Interesting. Okay. So a bit of a mixed bag, actually. So a little bit around the risks, a little bit around the unrealized cost savings, but the biggest result is no one trusts the data. And interestingly enough, we had a slide or a big banner with some of these, many more actually, examples. And no one trusts the data is probably the most popular concern and priority, because if you don't have that as the foundation, then it's very difficult to know what to do with anything else. I don't know, Harry or Andre, if you have any comments on those polling results and surprises.
Yeah, I'm going to say a little bit surprised and not surprised at the same time, because there's so much information to gather from our colleagues across the world, and sometimes it's fast and furious, and sometimes it's very sparse. So, it's very difficult to trust the data, but there's more to it than that, I think. I'm sure we'll be able to give more details or insight into how do we go from not trusting the data to getting the data and then trusting it as well.
I
I'm a bit
couldn't
surprised
agree more.
about the result.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that will be more about risk that we don't know, or unrealized savings. Yeah.
And I guess most people would suspect that, but if you can't trust the data, then that is where you have those unknown unknowns and what I call the black hole of death, because you don't even know what those risks are. You don't even know what those cost savings are, those opportunities are. So then it's, how do we start from the beginning at a foundational level to be able to trust the data? What's the defined action plan to get that very important first step there? And then we can, go ahead with risk remediation at a broader level and those unrealized cost savings. All right, so let's move on now to the first point, and I have a few happy photos of us together over the years. Harry knows I love to put a photo on a slide. It's a wonder that you still let me take photos of the team. But when we start from the beginning, Harry, and this started a much longer when you first joined ABB. When you first built the SAM program, what was the primary reason, do you think, that executives gave that green light to engage with Anglepoint to have this much broader SAM managed service program?
So a couple of things. There is a skill set in a lot of, in your company or in ABB, or with our friends on the line, whether they are from France, Spain, Poland, I think as well. I've seen Switzerland. In your company, when you assess what skill sets you have, you go up to a point, and then when you look at your software asset management or your hardware asset management, you realize there's more to it than the skill sets you have. And as competent, as excellent as your internal colleagues are, there is an overwhelming amount of information to look at and understand. And this is where services such as those provided by Anglepoint come into play, because in a sense, you're buying a service, but you're buying time because you don't have the time nor the skill sets to develop, yet you're under pressure. So there is that pressure, we've got to deliver, but if we don't have the skill sets, then we've got to find a different way of doing it. So Anglepoint is one of those companies that does that, and we've been with them since when, 2000, I can't remember,
2020 at the beginning,
yeah.
right before COVID hit.
Yeah, so we started working together a year and a half, 2 years before COVID, but even before that, we started discussing, months before. And so the journey starts by you as SAM practitioners or IT asset management practitioners looking in-house to see what is it that's most important and can you deliver with the skill sets you have. In my level, once we've done that assessment, we had to look outside. We had no choice because we don't have these skill sets. So some of the people in the pictures that you have there, they have those skill sets. And why not go to where it is? Yeah. There's no shame in asking for help or, in this sense, contracting for help and contracting for services. Because you either have the skill sets in your house, as I said before, and then you can try to develop it, enhance it, and bring that whole team together, or you focus on key areas, and then you work with your partners on the areas that is going to be difficult for you.
And I think the most common kind of response that we get from clients is around capacity and also the specialists and the expertise that our teams have. And the way that we try to look at things is with that partnership mindset, and it's like we're embedded almost in the team. And it's really lovely, watching presentations and people don't know who's from ABB or who's from Anglepoint. We're just that one team trying to push forward and improve SAM maturity by remediating the risk, realizing those optimization opportunities and everything else. And once we first came on board, of course, there was quite a few changes that happened at ABB, one of which was the introduction of what's known as the ABB way. And essentially what this is the operating model changed from being centralized to being very decentralized, where the business areas and the divisions now having the full power to make decisions about their business strategy with full P&L responsibility. And so the role of the global ITAM team as a central function changed from being decision makers to becoming enablers, and making sure that the BAs had all the information they needed to then make the decisions for their BA or division or country or whatever segment they are responsible for. And also, crucially, if they decided to accept that risk, then that was their decision to make, and they were and are able to make those decisions. So, Harry, when the ABB way first came into place, and I think this is relevant for a lot of people on the call today because there is that trend across industries globally to becoming more decentralized. What was the most challenging part from your perspective in your approach and how you worked with the business in line with the ABB way to remediate the risk and action change?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges you have with the size of ABB, we're over 40 countries, 4 different businesses, over 105,000 employees. At one point, we were over 130,000 employees. So you can imagine over 200,000 devices. And when it comes to IT asset management, specialists and practitioners start with governance. So policies, corporate governance, corporate policies. And as we were going through the journey of understanding and embedding the ABB way within our teams, we also had to come up with a corporate procedure that is aligned and linked to the ABB way, meaning how are we going to take care of our assets? And how are we going to reduce our risks? And how are we going to maximize any opportunities we have? And how are we going to deploy our methodologies, and how are we going to train people so that they can do IT asset management at their level for what they do. So not only do you have to come up with a governance approach and framework approach and processes, but you've got to be able to roll these out and explain it to your colleagues. And you've got to make it flexible enough so that from a corporate view, the model is working across the board, but from a business point of view or a country point of view, the model works for them because it works with what they have and what they need. So you don't have to over-engineer everything. You should not have to overcomplicate everything. So that when a country asset manager or a country software asset license manager comes, the idea is, and this is what we're doing, is to roll out a process in terms of how do we get software, roll out a process in terms of how do we defend against audit, roll out processes in terms of how do we measure and how do we optimize, as you guys know, from ELPs and ROARs. And we'll come into more details later with Andre, so that as we become much more familiar with these, our colleagues in the businesses and in the countries also become more familiar so that they can take care of their businesses very locally so that they can replicate what has been done at a corporate level, but applied to their business or their country area. And then that leaves us in a capacity to be something like high-level consultants who can help and come in and support their request processes, their audit defense mechanisms, their optimization paths, because we do have skill sets that are a little bit more than the average and sometimes way above the average. Yeah. And so this is the journey. And it means that in some of the pictures you have here, there's Sarah with the ABB logo in the background. These are two of our colleagues in Spain. Now, when we started the journey, they weren't there, but we've brought them in because they have specialization skills that we wanted within ABB. So we've hired additional people and they've brought in additional skills. Yeah. In the picture to I guess it's bottom left, I'm in the middle with the Anglepoint sign, but there's a guy in there with a red kind of sweater. He represents one of our main businesses. Now, he's a key interest or a key point for me because he's representing the work that we do at the corporate level into the businesses. He's translating what we're trying to put into place. And that is a key point. It's always going to be about governance, policies, process, and communication. And I cannot but insist on communicating and over communicating. And sometimes they'll be fed up with hearing so much, but sometimes they will come to you and ask you, like, why don't we have anything going on here? What's going on? What have you not communicated? So you have to communicate, but in that sense, you're building up that relationship. Now, the last picture we have, it's Sarah, I think it's Sarah Leonte, and the guys also working for us. Nishant is one of them. And I forgot the last person's name, but these are specialists in engineering area. Yeah. So they are working with one of our guys in Spain. So the one in blue, that's Leo, and he's a super cool guy, super caring. He's always helping out, coming with ideas, but he's also working with the guys at Anglepoint, communicating, concerned, showing his knowledge or asking for support. And this way, with the work that they do together, and also with Andy, when we talk about, risks and so forth, Leo, we have an internal thing called Race to Care, and he won a competition where there are over 1,000 ABBIS members, and he won a competition, and he was recognized for that by the CIO because he came up with ideas and approaches which they may not sound so novel, but saved, a pretty penny, a very, very pretty penny for ABB. And part of what he's done is also recorded in terms of how we manage our risks and our appetite to be able to manage those risks. So that's part of the journey. It's about having your team, communicating with them, trying to understand, support. It's a back and forth, I would say, operation or a back and forth bread and butter daily life. You cannot do it on your own. You've got to do it with your teams because there's so much, there's too much, and it's changing every day. I mean, we're going to talk about, I don't know, some crazy license in the next few minutes, but I'm pretty sure that next week, that license model will have changed. Yeah. And next year it's going to change. So everybody that's in this picture is always continually improving, training, communicating, and sharing. And they are also sometimes openly critical. Yeah. Don't forget, I mean, it cannot just be yes all the time. Sometimes you have to put you have to put your foot down, and whether it's just by, aggressively but respectfully asking questions and, like, explain that to me, please, because that didn't make sense. Yeah. Demonstrate it. And when you do that, you also get a sense of whether the person you're discussing with understands you as the counterpart. And please don't hesitate to do this when you're talking to your vendors or your salespeople. Yeah. Because if they don't know what they're buying or what they're talking about, keep in mind, you as a SAM manager, you need to be able to understand what it is that you have on your hands. And if you didn't understand it the first time, boy, you're going to have a hard time later on in life with that same product. So it's part of the journey. So this picture kind of illustrates it in a certain way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I just want to underline the point around education, building those relationships with stakeholders. So at ABB, we work with hundreds of stakeholders across the world in all time zones and in all business areas and divisions and parts of the business to help with data collection, to help with remediating risk, to help with understanding demand forecasting, or whatever the topic might be. And I think at the beginning, it was quite difficult because a lot of people didn't know who we were. Who is the SAM team? Why are they knocking on my door and asking me to spend a few hours trying to collect this data or to change my business operating model because I need to try to upgrade old software or remove something that I shouldn't have installed or need to pay for this extra license that I hadn't bought but I'm using. And so I think investing time on creating a foundation of the SAM corporate procedure, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, and then also building the relationships with the stakeholders is so important, because if you don't do that first, then by the time we come to asking for that data or we found a risk and now we need to do something about it, if they don't care, then they'll just continue to ignore your emails, and that's obviously not what we want to have. And I also appreciate from the BA's perspective with this change, and I know we have a couple on the call today, that with this change in operating model, they are now responsible for these new topics, these new tasks relating to STEM on top of their existing day jobs. And I think that that's applicable to lots of different people throughout their careers and how they've now joined this wonderful industry of ITAM. And so we need to be respectful, and as you said, Harry, make sure that they understand what we're here to do, how we can benefit them, and then vice versa. What is happening within their businesses? What's business critical mean for them, and how can we help support them and enable them to do business, if it's the engineers or whoever it might be. Alrighty, so let's move on to our second poll question. What is the primary driver for your organization's risk remediation efforts? Is it regulatory compliance, data security and privacy, cost optimization, or external audits? Ooh, this is pretty balanced. I'm a little bit surprised by this, but okay. So it's a bit of an even response rate across the board in terms of what is driving your organization's risk remediation efforts. Okay.
It's interesting because the two top vote getters for me are a translation of what's happening in our technologies today. Yeah. As we go from the old school licenses to subscription licenses or via web application licenses, right? So you're always thinking about, are we optimizing costs, especially when it comes to SaaS applications? Yeah. It's not the first, won't be the last, where things are slowly moving in towards SaaS. And I think most of our attendees or those who will be listening are using M365 at some point, and they're asking themselves, are we really spending so much, and do we really need all of that? And that's all about cost optimization. But then data security and privacy is next, because 105,000 employees across the world. The EU have their own set of data privacy, data protection regulations. The Americans have their own things. The Chinese have their own. In Switzerland, you're personally liable up to $150,000 in case of breaches. So I can say that because I went through a training that mentioned that, and I was like in shock. And then I made my voice, noticed and noted that there's no way I can just like that. But this is how tough the world is today, and especially like with data and security, data security and privacy. As we go on more into servers, quote unquote, in the cloud, as we go on more and more into containers and Kubernetes, performance might be great. There might be a good way towards understanding where the costs are and those things. But from a business, security and privacy is a must. Because if you're not secure, then your operations, whether you're licensed or not, are always at a high risk. And so you have to, it's very difficult to juggle. Yeah, but this is one of the key messages that we have at ABB. And again, it comes to, this data security and privacy issues. We've had some challenges there over the past few years. So, in terms of our InfoSec infrastructure, it has been toughened and beefed up so that when we're also talking about cost optimization and regulatory compliance, it becomes, I'm not going to say natural, but almost natural that it's part of the conversation. It is not separate, and it cannot be. Especially in IT asset management. Yeah, you're always going to have terms and conditions. You're always going to have a paragraph about security and privacy, even more so when you're having named subscription licenses or named users, because that is specific, and that person's name, that's not your property. That's not the company's property. So you have to safeguard it.
It's really interesting. And no matter what that driver is or which answer you put into the poll, bottom line is all of these things are important. All of these things need to be addressed and contribute to why remediating the risk that is found is so important and crucial, not just to ITAM, but to broader businesses overall. All right, so now let's get into the details. So here we have a lovely slide that there's a lot going on. So I'm going to walk you through what this process looks like. And then Andre is going to jump in with his parts of what he manages, because throughout this, there are parts that we as Anglepoint will deliver. There are parts that ABB is responsible for managing, but we're always in lockstep and we're always helping each other in making sure that we can move forward. So we use this framework at Anglepoint for all of our managed service clients as part of our continuous service delivery. But of course, each client has its own nuances, which is why we'll show you how Andre manages this for ABB in just a second. So to orient you to this slide, if we look in the middle, we have the people and stakeholders with different colored columns. And these represent the various teams that we work with. So procurement, security, cloud, center of excellence, and then the various business areas and product owners. Now, typically the operational team in that middle column should have representation from each of these different areas of the business, which is why we have the different colors. We then have the SAM service in the middle in gray. I'm not sure why we're grey, but we'll we'll go with it. Clearly, we are important and not grey. But so we have the internal resources, and then we also have the managed service provider in that part. So we're here as that core team. And then sitting over the top, we have the steering committee. And here we also have that executive representation with the different colors. And you can also see that Anglepoint can be that governance administrator for the steering committee as well. So at a really high level, if we zoom out, we will measure and deliver a report, risk and opportunity assessment report, and these risks are registered and prioritized by the steering committee in the internal GRC tool down in the bottom right hand corner. And then we will also in parallel have all of the details relating to all of these recommendations registered in Elevate, where we're going to be tracking on a more regular basis, and then we will upload all of the details that are needed, segmenting it by business area and having all the device names and all of the information that's critical to then move forward. When it comes time to do the next report, and there might be different frequencies depending on that deliverable. So IBM might be quarterly, Microsoft user profiling might be monthly, a green IT report might be 6 monthly, OpenText might be yearly. It depends on the priorities from the client's perspective. We can then measure that change and celebrate the wins that the team has collaboratively worked on since the previous report. So we go into that next level of detail and think about that top right-hand corner box. So it starts with the initial effective license position, or whatever report it happens to be, and the risk and opportunity assessment report. So at Anglepoint, the ROAR captures the summary financial values and the detailed actionable recommendations. So we collaborate with our clients to take those numbers from being potential and make them into realized cost savings and cost avoidance. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it doesn't really matter what type of ROAR this is. While most often it will be the publisher ELPs, it could also be a SAM tooling ROAR, or for Green IT, or FinOps, or ITAM program transformation deliverables. But the key thing is that ROAR contains the actionable recommendations for our clients. So then after that ROAR is delivered, Andre will then review the PowerPoint and will register these risks into the GRC. So Andre, do you want to walk us through what that looks like on your side and how you take it from the ROAR into the GRC?
Yes, of course. So, based on the information that I have in the ROAR, I always meet with the GSAM and together with them, since they have good understanding of what is happening, and they can give me some clues. And we always try to collaborate. So even now we have also invited Anglepoint to also join the meeting if they have some input as well, additional input. I entered the risk into our GRC tool, and it's grouped by the vendor. Then to each vendor there is multiple scenarios, or one scenario, based on the ROAR findings. So, and each scenario is it's about the problem, what is going on, what the issue is, what's the risk statement is. There are information about which business area is impacted the most. Might be one, might be more, as ABB is decentralized, so it's not always obvious which one is that. And we determine the priority. And based on the financial impact, on the likelihood, so if it really, what is the chance of occurrence of this risk? If it's a high chance of occurring, or maybe low, maybe it's something which is not so important. and the velocity, so how fast it will strike us. And based on those three factors, I determined the priority of the scenario. So of course we treat every scenario as a priority, as we want to have everything clean, but of course there are bigger and smaller risks, and we need to remember about that. For each risk scenario, we have a response. So based on the recommendation from the ROAR, which is attached to each scenario, to each risk that we have a response. It might be multiple responses, and so response is basically how we will manage the risk. It's the task. What needs to be done to mitigate the risk? And each response is attached to each scenario, and that's how we manage it. We determine due date. We determine who is the scenario owner, let's say, who is the task owner, who should be responsible for that. And that's how it's done, basically. I then track the progress of the response. If it's really if it's in progress, if it's implemented, we mostly meet on a monthly basis, and we track the responses, or on each ROAR. It depends, because each risk might be different. One might be contractual, and one might be like the action needs to be taken within a month. So we need to address it accordingly. It's not something that can be like, okay, we can determine that each month we have to check this, and that. No, it's for each risk, it might be different. So that's how it looks in GRC. And of course, then we have a tool provided by Anglepoint, which is Elevate. And in Elevate, it's much more complex. It's much more detailed. As Sarah mentioned, there are many more tasks, because in the GRC, these are high risk rather than lower risk, and these are other for tracking purposes. Which in Elevate, it's a really good tool for the actions to be taken. So right now, Anglepoint, after each ROAR, creates a task for us, for which then during the meeting, me and the GSAM, we address the task. So we need to make sure that they are properly addressed to the people that are responsible for that. It may be somebody from the business, might be somebody from infrastructure, many people involved. And yeah, and when we set up the due date, after that, it's being tracked by me. And I'm sort of a policeman here.
Mr. GRC, right?
Yes, GRC police is there, and of course we send some notification. I send some notification, track the progress, and check with the GSAMs. If escalation is needed, then we can escalate it to the business for help. That's how it looks like. In the Elevate, we are sharing files, sharing notes, so tracking the progress constantly. And when the risk is remediated, when the task is done, yes, we put we close the task, but with some evidence as well. What has been done, if the task has been completed or not. Of course, if not, then we're not closing the task. And if there are some files need to be shared, then we share those files there as well. So there is evidence and we can go to it and check if it was really if it was completed as it should be. of course, after in the next ROAR, we will also see a note that this will that it will be completed and the risk will not show up anymore. So that's the biggest proof of what is done.
That's what we're all trying to achieve. So
yeah.
So Andre, you're essentially Mr. GRC man, and I said that as a joke, but we do call you that sometimes, because you're looking over all of the risks that are registered from a GRC perspective. And you're right, our ROARs might contain non-financially based recommendations, things like we need to have a product owner for this work stream, or we need to do XYZ to get to best prepare for the next contract negotiation, and that's not necessarily a risk that should be registered in GRC, but it is something that we want to track and make sure is managed through to closure, and that's where we use Elevate for everything, and then we use the GRC tool for those higher impact based items. So we go back to the GRC. So who at ABB has access and visibility to GRC? Who else is looking at the tool?
Management, higher management, so C-level management. Basically, everybody can have access if they ask me, but they should not track it. And of course, I will not give access to everybody. But the GSAMs also have access to it, so they can track it. They can see what's going on, but they cannot make any changes. This is something that is done by me only, because I'm responsible for that. And also, yes, so high level management right now. C-level management is looking into it, and they are checking what is going on there, what's the progress, and what we are dealing with.
And I think it's so important and critical that the CIOs from each of the different business areas, as well as the core IS CIO, has visibility, and they do actually look at it because it's then categorized into what's critical, what's high, what's medium impact, as the kind of summary of the risks that are registered. Then if I'm in one business area and I can see, oh my goodness, why do I now have a high risk here, and why is it still there, who from my team is working on it, then they have that visibility and they can make sure that that something can be done about it.
Yeah, even in terms of escalation, they can have the data, they can have everything, they have visibility if we need some escalation. So that's also helpful. Yes.
I agree, because unfortunately escalations are sometimes needed, and you're kind of the middle person because you're responsible for the GRC part, but you're working closely with the GSAM, who is the global software asset manager, and at ABB they're aligned to publish a work stream. So there's one for Microsoft and engineering apps and so on and so forth. So then they are the people who are then working with the different areas of the business or the end stakeholder, whoever it is that needs to actually take the action, and they're making sure that they have the information they need to instruct that end stakeholder, and that they're providing them with the information and education that they need so they understand why it is so important. And I think it's also helpful that from a GRC standpoint, you're looking at it on a monthly basis. So less frequently, I would say, but then that means you kind of have that high level view to look at all of the detailed actions that's happening in Elevate and on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis through our work streams to make sure that we are all on track and nothing is getting nothing is slipping through. So maybe if I go into a little bit more detail on the Elevate side of things. So as Andre mentioned, our Anglepoint SME will copy across all of those recommendations, no matter how big or small, and they will put them into Elevate. Now, Elevate is our proprietary tool that we use for project management during our engagement. So this is for each ELP and ROAR cycle. This is where we have all of our data requests, and we add all of the stakeholders, they have timelines, and in the background, there's also inbuilt automation that helps our SMEs to process large data sets and maximizing efficiency and accuracy. So we use Elevate for lots of different reasons. And in this case, we're using it as that tool. We have hundreds of people from ABB who have access to Elevate, and they can log in to see the details relating to that task and that action that they need to take. But we're mindful that there's a lot of information there. So we have set up access restrictions so that only the people who need to know can see the task that they are assigned to. So in some cases, one business area might not be able to see, or will not be able to see, what the other business areas' responsibilities are or what they need to do. And that's been really important from a data privacy perspective, and making sure that the Elevate project reflects the ABB and who's responsible for what. Now, they might be grouped by topic, for example, and so we can track it over time. And the owner is really important, as well as the timeline. So before we publish the ROAR, we work with the global SAM manager to confirm who is that person that is responsible and what timeline does that need to be completed by. And then Andre, you then reconfirm that as part of your GRC conversations when you're updating GRC after the ROAR to make sure that we all have that alignment. So then when we get to asking that person, the task owner, hey, can you help us with this? Can you do this? Then there is that alignment on who should ultimately be responsible for taking action and driving that accountability wherever it may sit. And it's really important for us, I think, especially in the context of the ABB way, to make sure the task owners have all the information that they need. So if they have any questions, they can ask these in the notes and we'll respond. But each task will include instructions, options, if there's different options they can consider, because we really want to put the power in the task owner's hands to decide what the best course of action is in line with their strategy. So rather than us thinking you need to do X, we can say, okay, you have option A, B, and C. It's up to you which option you want to choose, but ultimately an option needs to be chosen by the right owner, and so then we can move forward. So we're working together with all the different people and the different colors on the page to make sure that, you know, on a daily, weekly basis that that there is progress that's being made. And I think the other key piece to this puzzle that Harry alluded to earlier is the SAM procedure document. So a few years ago, we rewrote the SAM policy and procedure documentation to reflect the ABB way. And this includes a very detailed RACI that outlines who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each step throughout this process. And that's from data collection to confirming stakeholders through to risk remediation and cost savings opportunities. So essentially what this means is that the risk owner, once it's been assigned in line with that RACI and aligned across the board, is then obligated to take that action. And if that's to remediate, or if they choose to accept the risk and then they can accept it and register it in the GRC, then that's completely up to them. And that's really important because we want to empower the businesses. Not everything is possible. We don't want to boil the ocean. As Andre said, there's different ways of prioritizing. So we need just to make sure that everything's documented. And so then, during the next ELP and ROAR, we're going to remeasure and celebrate the success of the actions taken and the risk remediated in that prior period, because, as Harry likes to say, what happens in between the ELP and ROAR is what's most important. All right, so let's move on to our third poll question. Okay, so where do you track risks and optimization opportunities today? Do you have something similar to a GRC tool? Do you look at everything within a SAM tool if you have one? Do you have a spreadsheet perhaps somewhere manually tracking it? Or perhaps you don't have a formal tool for risk management. So I'll give you just a minute. Ooh, okay, interesting. So most people are either using their SAM tool to track all of these risks, or they're using it manually. That's fine. That's probably not so much of a surprise to me personally. I think the tool that that ABB has created and developed is quite a good tool to be able to capture this in a more formal manner. But I know that that's not always necessarily available at every organization. Okay. So if we move to the next slide, please, Kirsten. I have some more pictures because we love a photo, but we wanted to talk about what's the impact of all of this. So we've set up the education piece. We've created the policy and procedure documentation outlining who's responsible for what. But then what's the impact? So Andre, how has having Elevate and the GRC process, how has that impacted your conversations with the BAs who you're working with and working through the global SAM managers to remediate risk? Has it made it easier for them to convince you to do it?
Yes, it's made a lot easier for me because it's visible. Yes, so we track it. We see the priority. If it's high, then of course it catches the eye, and we meet on a monthly basis or on or ROAR basis. Depends if it's for the risk owners, the task owners, for example, in Elevate. I do not have to look for the person because I have it. I have the assigned person there, and when I add the notes, everybody is actually responding. Yes, because they receive a notification. So that it's really helpful. You don't have to go through a tons of emails looking for the person responsible because you have everything in one place, and that's
Yeah.
for me that's a great win. I don't have to run people and send emails, and then you know how it is with the emails when they start to grow and you might miss something there. No, for each task it's each stream and
Yeah.
clear notes. Somebody responded, great. If not, then we can have a meeting and yeah, and discuss what is happening. But having everything in one place, it's a great. I would recommend that for everyone.
And Harry, how about you? How has this process changed the conversations that you're having with your executives? Has it made it easier to get budget or headcount, or having that improved visibility into what's happening?
So what's important for me and maybe the company as well, and maybe other companies, that post ROAR and before the next ELP, there are operational activities that are continually going and being challenged and monitored to change the situation, to improve the situation. And this is where, and I've been saying this to our colleagues at Anglepoint for ages, this is where the service really is. Because when you make those changes and you are a change enabler, then that hits the bottom line. Yeah. A real example, coming back to what Andre was saying about risks and so forth. Everybody's using Microsoft, right? I mean, so it's easy to use. And we know that Microsoft products have their life cycles and they come to an end, and you hear about it 2 years before it happens. But you in your company, you don't do anything. It's like, oh, we have another 2 years, we have another 5 years because it's going to go extended. But if you took in terms of finance, if you keep extending or waiting till the last minute, investments that could have been taken care of earlier by being proactive when you see in your ELPs and ROARs recommendations that this is going to happen. And if you change now, in most cases, at least in the past, it has come in less riskier and less in terms of prices. Yeah. Or when you're looking at different license models and the recommendation is saying a standard license approach might be good if it's a small unit, but you might want to go for an enterprise because then you can optimize it once you pass a certain threshold. So this is where you, me as ABB guy, and with the consultants or the SMEs from Anglepoint have to have that discussions. Yeah. And you have to talk and work it out and see what your possibilities are. Because if you don't, then there's no benefit for you and there's no improvement. And when that happens, and when it's, I'm not going to say it's expected, but when it happens, then the benefits are there and it's recognized. And when it's recognized, then you know it's paid off, which means that the investment was worthwhile and you get recognition, not in the sense that, oh, pat on the back, you win a trophy, but recognition in the sense that when you propose something to your CIOs, they understand that you know what you're talking about, what you're proposing. So it's a lot less difficult to convince from that perspective. Of course, you still have to justify, in terms of business sense, what's my return on investment, et cetera, and how much time is it going to take? Because we want everything done yesterday, even if we're ordering it next month. But you have credibility. And that's something that only by building that service and those services and pushing for those things to happen in terms of remediation, that's what we call it, yeah, or optimization, it is a service. Only by having that do you get that credit, and it makes life easier. But also, it makes life easier because once the data is there and somebody's coming in to challenge you on whether you're managing your estate correctly during an audit, the assumption I would make is that you have read the contracts, you understand the terms and conditions, and that your numbers are going to validate that. Plus minus 5%. You might have some human interpretations because we are human, we're not AI. So that helps, and your credibility is what's on the line most of the time.
I agree, and we've got a photo here of the Driving Change Award that was given to Dominica Franca at ABB for her commitment and helping to move the dial of ITAM maturity so quickly at ABB. But we're on a call earlier today where one of the global SAM managers said, for the first time, we can speak to anyone in the business about big topics because now we have the visibility about the importance of ITAM. And for me, that speaks volumes. We've been told that things are impossible, and yet, as Harry mentioned, we had one person, Leo Frias, in the engineering apps team with our teams, who remediated all risk that was identified within 6 months. That's amazing. So as challenging as it can be sometimes, what we have been able to do together in our partnership is to prove that this can work and it is possible. And if I take a step back and think about other clients where we've had this implemented, people have gotten promoted, they've gotten cash bonuses for cost savings awards. There are a lot of achievements that can come because of having that, also the personal satisfaction of being able to point to tangible results that have been achieved together as a team and seeing that progress be made. So I appreciate we are at time. So big thank you to everybody from me. Overall, I think the key to success is by working together and leveraging the tools that we have available, even if it is manually in a spreadsheet, and using Elevate to track all of those recommendations and making sure that they are actioned through to completion. We're driving to those business outcomes, and then having that continuous service delivery to unlock the value of ITAM for the rest of the business. So thank you so much. Thank you for your Q&A questions. We will be in contact afterwards, and happy to have follow-up conversations. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your Thursday, wherever you happen to be in the world.